What happened to Ukraine's ATACMS? One of Ukraine's best weapons barely gets used. Why? When the Kyiv Independent reported last week that Ukraine's February 24th ATACMS strike on a Russian command post, well, they used one word in the headline that caught my attention. Rare. Not major, not significant, just plain rare. A weapon capable of hitting targets 186 miles away that Ukraine has been asking for since 2022, that finally arrived in meaningful numbers, that Russia has openly feared since the moment the first crate landed in Kyiv, and the press is treating each use like a celebrity sighting. Hey, it's Henry Cavill, you don't see him in public much. Hey, it's ATACMS, you don't see him in public much. So I think there's a story worth understanding about why Ukraine doesn't fire these very often, and the result has turned America's most capable ground-launched munition into something Ukraine fires like it's a last cigarette, saving it until after you've survived a black bear encounter in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Hey friends, Wes here, multi-branch US veteran and law grad, and before we jump in, what the heck is ATACMS? Well, ATACMS, pronounced like attack, just think about steakums, used to be the belle of the ball. In 2024, you couldn't open a Chrome tab without seeing an ATACMS headline. So what is it? Well, ATACMS is the Army Tactical Missile System. It's a ballistic missile fired from Ukraine's HIMARS launchers. The long-range version reaches out to 300 kilometers with either a unitary warhead that hits one thing very hard, or cluster munitions that blanket a large area with shrapnel. It's survivable against most Russian air defenses when they're not specifically cued against it, and it can reach targets that many other weapons in Ukraine's ground-launched arsenal simply can't touch. Airfields? ATACMS loves these. Command posts deep behind the front? ATACMS specialty, like Gordon Ramsay's Beef Wellington. Logistics hubs Russia considered safe? ATACMS loves logistics more than FedEx. The S-400 battery Russia parked in Kursk thinking that range buffer would somehow protect it? Whole bunch of nope. ATACMS is the weapon that forced Russia to move things, to harden things, to scatter things. Even the threat of ATACMS changes Russian behavior, which means even the missiles sitting unfired in Ukrainian custody are still doing strategic work. Now, Ukraine first received shorter-range ATACMS versions in fall of 2023. The longer-range upgraded models began arriving in spring of 2024, and from the moment they arrived, the supply was finite, the permissions were complicated, and the political sensitivity around them never fully went away. Since spring of 2025, a case-by-case approval process overseen by current Defense Secretary Peter Aloysius Hegseth effectively blocked ATACMS strikes inside Russia as Washington tried to nudge Moscow toward peace talks. On at least one occasion in 2025, Ukraine sought to use ATACMS against a target on Russian territory and was rejected outright. What a clusterfuck. The real danger here for Ukraine would be pissing off a donor nation and no longer receiving material support. That's a full-time operational discipline running parallel to the actual war. So the last recorded ATACMS strike inside Russia before the November 2025 resumption was January 14th, 2025, in the final days of the Biden administration. That's a gap of roughly 10 months between confirmed cross-border uses. During that entire period, Ukraine was still striking deep into Russian-held territory, just not with ATACMS. The November 19th, 2025 strike appears to be the first confirmed ATACMS use into Russia under the Trump administration, pointing to a shift in policy and the possibility that another batch of missiles had possibly been supplied. Then, February 24th, 2026, the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, saw Ukraine fire ATACMS at Russia's 5th Army Command Post and the elite Rubicon Drone Center. The Kyiv Independent called it a rare strike, noting that the last confirmed use before that had been November. So that's 2 confirmed strikes in the public record across roughly 3 months. That's not exactly an operational tempo. When Biden gave Ukraine the green light to launch ATACMS into Russian territory, Ukraine likely only had about 50 missiles left in its arsenal, according to 2 senior US officials. 50. For context, in the opening days of Operation Iraqi Freedom 2003, strategery, we're gonna get them terrorists. The US fired roughly 800, keep it together, Wes. The The US fired roughly 800 ATACMS, so Ukraine's entire allocated stock across the period when most of the meaningful permission decisions were being made was 50 rounds. While ATACMS had major lasting battlefield effects, it never proved to be, for Ukraine at least, a decisive factor, based on the tiny quantities provided. That's not a criticism of the weapon, it's a criticism of the quantity. You can't build operational tempo around 50 missiles. You can't even build a sustained campaign around 50 missiles. What you can do is spend them carefully on the targets that justify the cost, the signal, and the political conversation that follows every use. Waiting on US production cycles or congressional appropriations bullshit. The feedback loop between a drone getting jammed and the next software update arriving at the front is measured in weeks in Ukraine. For a foreign-supplied missile, that loop runs through Arlington, Virginia, and takes considerably longer. Cost and volume is the second. A single ATACMS shot represents a major investment and a significant political signal. Drones can be launched in waves across multiple target sets simultaneously, forcing Russian air defenses to spend missiles on cheap threats before the expensive ones arrive. Targeting flexibility is the third. ATACMS is optimized for fixed, high-value targets like airfields, command nodes, large logistics hubs. Drones are better for persistent pressure, oil infrastructure, and repeated strikes on industrial facilities. The result is a rational Ukrainian behavior pattern. Conserve ATACMS for the moments that justify the cost and the political noise, and run the daily strike campaign with drones. Missiles buy moments of dominance. Drones buy months of attrition. Ukraine needs both. So what did Ukraine's February ATACMS strike actually tell us? Well, the February 24th strike is worth unpacking because the target selection tells you something about how Ukraine is thinking about ATACMS right now. First, Russia's 5th Army Command Post, blammo. Then the Rubicon Drone Center. Trust me, these guys deserved it. Then ammunition depots and logistics nodes across Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Nice. To me, that looks like a coherent effort to hit command and control infrastructure supporting Russian offensive operations on the anniversary of the full-scale invasion with an American-made missile in short supply. So why not use the Flamingo or the homegrown alternatives for this? Well, it points to the possibility that another batch of ATACMS has been supplied to Ukraine. The US Army has been receiving the first tranches of the Precision Strike Missile, or the PRISM, and those deliveries may have freed up additional ATACMS rounds for Ukraine without drawing down missiles the US needs for its own adventures in Southwest Asia. But there are other, perhaps more compelling reasons too. Zelensky confirmed on February 23rd, the day before those strikes, that a Russian attack had disrupted Flamingo production. He said, quote, "There was a delay in production and that Ukraine doesn't have many Flamingo missiles right now," end quote. You don't spin from a depleted magazine on an anniversary strike when you have ATACMS available. Also, the Flamingo has a survivability problem against dense air defenses. With a 6-meter wingspan and a mass of over 6 tons, it's highly visible to Russian air defenses. The design, though, is intentional. It's built for deep strike missions where enemy air defenses are sparse. Not to mention that ATACMS is a ballistic missile. The Flamingo isn't. ATACMS flies a high-arc ballistic trajectory at supersonic speeds, which makes it significantly harder to intercept than a subsonic cruise missile. Against a time-sensitive defended target like a command post, that survivability matters enormously. Still, it's worth remembering that 3 years ago, Ukraine's survival depended entirely on what Western capitals decided to ship and when they decided to permit it. Today, Ukraine has a domestic cruise missile that can reach a ballistic missile factory 1,400 kilometers inside Russia, built by people who used to design video games. In my mind, that's a country that looked at its own dependency and decided, methodically and under fire, to MacGyver its way out of it. Richard Dean Anderson, eat your heart out. Whatever happens in the future at any negotiating table, that capability doesn't go away when the war ends. The most dangerous weapon in Ukraine's arsenal right now isn't the one Washington supplied. It's not ATACMS. It's the one Washington can't take back. Ukrainian ingenuity. Okay, smoke 'em if you got 'em. That's it for today, my friends. Subscribing is the best free way to help me push back on Russian disinformation. And by the way, kids, don't smoke. This is a fake cigarette. It's not cool unless you're French. And as always, Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.